Alright, hey guys, my name is Fri, and I'm here to talk to you about the relationship between anxiety, cognitive processing, and error monitoring. First, let's talk about anxiety. Anxiety is one of the most common and widespread mental health issues facing individuals in the world today. In fact, nearly 30% of US adults will experience anxiety at some point in their lifetime, and nearly 20% of US adults will experience anxiety over any given 12-month period. And while these rates are astonishingly high, what we need to recognize is that anxiety is an umbrella term, encompassing a variety of different behavioral and psychological responses to stress and trauma. The one that we're going to be talking about today is generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, has a variety of different psychological and behavioral symptoms, including constant hyperarousal, uncontrollable worry, as well as strategic avoidance behavior. And while anxiety can often produce an adaptive response for individuals hoping to engage in new and potentially threatening situations by increasing their overall levels of vigilance, overactive levels of anxiety can actually produce negative responses in terms of cognitive functioning. So it's really important to try to understand the relationship between anxiety and cognitive processing so that individuals can understand both these sources and the effects of their anxiety. One theory that looks at this relationship is called attentional control theory. Attentional control theory rests on a basic differentiation between two types of attention. First, there is goal-directed attention, and second, stimulus-driven attention. However, these two types of attention are not entirely independent. The brain regions that both of them rely on, in particular the anterior cingulate cortex, both rely upon the same finite processing powers of the central executive function. So, according to this theory, anxiety occurs when a goal is threatened, leading to a decrease in goal-directed attention and an increase in stimulus-driven attention so that individuals can ascertain the source of this new threat. This leads to a change in the direction of cognitive processing at the expense of task-relevant stimuli in favor of task-irrelevant stimuli. And so, what a new type of research, or that is attempting to add some sort of quantitative evidence to this relationship between anxiety and error processing, is looking at the relationship between anxiety and error processing through event-related potentials, or ERPs. So event-related potentials occur because the brain communicates through both chemical and electrical signaling, allowing us to measure the overall degree of electrical activity in different regions of the brain through measuring fluctuations in the voltages of different neuron groups. So these type of events, these type of ERPs can occur in response to any type of events. When it occurs in response to an error, what you'll see is a sharp negative deflection occurring about 50 to 100 milliseconds after the actual error occurred. This is called error-related negativity. But what does this have to do with anxiety? Great question, Fri. Well, the answer is the majority of error monitoring occurs in those same places, same regions of the brain, including mainly the anterior cingulate cortex. So that when anxiety occurs, because it's increasing your source of internal threat, or your vigilance towards those internal threats, it will actually increase your total amount of error monitoring. And while ERN has historically been a great predictor as a static biomarker of the way in which anxiety may be affecting your cognitive processing, there's been very little evidence that a lot of traditional therapeutic methods, such as CBT, have been effective in reducing the ERN. So, this is where my paper comes in. The effect of expressive writing on the error-related negativity among individuals with chronic worry. The authors hypothesized that CBT wasn't being effective because it wasn't addressing the underlying source of this internal threat, and therefore the increased ERN response. So instead, and they actually found that by increased exposure to mistakes or errors, this could actually be increasing the need for cognitively compensatory processing. So instead, they tried a more targeted approach of expressive writing. So when the desire to perform well has been shown historically to lead to increased worries in the brain that compete for cognitive resources within the general working memory. The authors hypothesized that expressive writing could offload some of these worrisome thoughts, leading to fewer overall distractions, and therefore a decreased need for compensatory cognitive processing that would be expressed in a reduced ERN. However, the authors thought that despite this reduced ERN, there wouldn't actually be any effect in terms of the cognitive performance. So, let's get to the method of how they went about showing this. First, they started off by giving a survey to 1,462 college-age participants to test their levels of anxiety using the Penn State Worry Questionnaire. They reduced this down to 44 participants who scored above a 61 on the PSWQ, which is widely accepted to be the cutoff for generalized anxiety. Due to unusable EEG data, 4 participants had to be dropped, leading to a final number of 40. The researchers also only used women in this study because the relationship between ERN and anxiety has historically been stronger in women than in men. Next, the researchers hooked all the participants up to EEG machines and gave them the state trait anxiety inventory to get a baseline level of their levels of psychological arousal before either of the writing conditions. They next randomly sorted all the participants into two writing conditions. One, in the expressive writing condition, individuals were asked to write as openly and honestly about all their thoughts and feelings regarding this upcoming task. In the control condition, they were asked to write about something completely unemotional and unrelated. They then sat at the computer for 8 minutes, wrote out all their thoughts, and after that had 4 minutes in which to process these thoughts before moving on. They then moved on to a flanker task, in which participants are asked to respond with the left and right hands using a computer keyboard to a variety of congruent and incongruent letter block chains. So, for example, the participant might be asked to respond with their left hand if the middle letter is an N, and their right hand if the middle letter is an M. I took one of these flanker tasks to see what the fuss is about, and they're perfect if you want to induce like a lot of errors. And so finally, before the end of the experiment, they gave them a variety of other psychological tests to ascertain the difference in between their levels of psychological arousal before and after the writing conditions. Cool, so let's get to some results. In line with their first hypothesis, the researchers did find that those in the expressive writing condition did show a tempered ERP response. As you can see from this graph on the left here, these are the ERP responses to correct answers, incorrect answers, as well as the difference between the two. From the dotted line, you can tell that the overall difference between the ERN response to correct and incorrect answers was much closer to 0 in the expressive writing condition, therefore indicating to researchers that expressive writing as a targeted intervention can reduce the ERN response in individuals with GAD. This is found to be statistically significant at the p=0.05 level. However, in line with their second hypothesis, the researchers also found that there was no actual difference in cognitive performance on the flanker test as a result of the writing condition that you were in. So, what can we take away from this study? It's a little bit of a mixed bag, but the first thing that we can take away is that ERN is not simply a static biomarker indicating one's level of risk for anxiety, but is instead more modifiable than previously thought. One of the ways in which this can be modified looks to be expressive writing. However, there's still no evidence that expressive writing can actually produce any changes in cognitive performance. And we also have to talk about the study's limitations. First is the sample size. 40 is a pretty small number, and the sample consisted entirely of women, college-age women. And secondarily, while the participants were sorted into the writing and the control conditions randomly, there was no actual baseline ERN response levels taken before the writing occurred, so that the researchers couldn't actually tell the differences within any individual based on the writing response. Finally, the effects were only short-term, with the participants taking the flanker task immediately after the expressive writing condition. Future researchers could look into the long-term effects of a continuous expressive writing practice upon baseline ERN levels. So today we looked at the basic relationship between anxiety and cognitive processing through event-related brain potentials within the anterior cingulate cortex. We also looked into 2 different types of attention and how cognitive processes can be diverted by anxiety. Finally, we looked at some evidence that expressive writing may serve as a targeted intervention that shows promise for reducing the ERN response in individuals with generalized anxiety disorder. This evidence is only a couple months old, just coming out this August, and so I'm excited to see in the future how researchers can use this to further explore the relationship between anxiety, cognitive processing, and error monitoring. Thank you.